Have you ever been judged, not by what you've achieved, but by what you look like? Imagine standing at the airport gate, dressed in your best suit, holding a first-class ticket you earned through years of sweat and sacrifice only to be told, "Sir, this section is for premium passengers. What would you do, stay silent or stand up?" For Elias Carter, a brilliant black CEO respected across America, this wasn't just humiliation. It was a moment that would test his faith, his patience, and his very belief in fairness. One phone call from him didn't just change his day, it changed the entire airline industry. But here's the question: when the world sees you as less than what you are, how do you respond, with anger or with purpose? When power is finally in your hands, do you seek revenge or justice? Because sometimes it's not the loudest fight that changes the world, but the calmest choice made in silence. So, if you've ever been underestimated, ignored, or told you don't belong, this story is for you. Take a breath, listen closely, and ask yourself, what would I have done if I were him? If you believe in dignity, in courage, and in the power of quiet strength, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's begin the story of a man who turned rejection into revolution. Atlanta Airport was packed in the morning. The loudspeakers blared like the heartbeat of a city that never sleeps. Suitcases rolled across the polished floor, punctuated by the clatter of high heels and urgent phone calls. Elias Carter walked slowly through the crowd. Charcoal trench coat, black leather shoes, a slim briefcase tucked into his waist. He didn't have the hurried air of a businessman on a business trip, but rather the air of someone familiar with the airport, as if he had passed through 1,000 boarding gates in his life. Elias looked at his watch, an old one, a small scratch on the glass. He smiled slightly. It was 7:47 a.m., a number he had long remembered, not just for the flight time, but for the special moment. Gate 47 ahead was crowded. The line was getting shorter. The electronic board clearly read North Star Airways Flight 328, first class boarding now. He stepped up and gently handed the e-ticket to the check-in staff. The young girl glanced at it and smiled. "Good morning, sir. You're good to go?" Elias nodded in thanks, preparing to move on, but a voice behind him rang out, a bit harsh, a bit condescending. "Excuse me. Sir, are you sure you're in the right line?" He turned around. A middle-aged man in a white shirt. His name tag read Mark Ellison, Gate Manager. Elias looked straight ahead, his voice calm. "Yes, I'm sure. My ticket is first class." Mark frowned, took the ticket, and looked at the screen. Then he shook his head slightly, as if something didn't add up. "Sir, we've had a few cases of ticket mix-ups this week. Mind showing me your ID?" Elias was silent. He pulled out his wallet and handed over his driver's license. Mark examined it carefully, then looked up. "Do you happen to have another form of ID? Maybe a company badge?" An awkward silence fell. The people behind him began to whisper. A young man whispered, "Man, just let him board. He's holding up the line." But Mark paid no attention. He looked at Elias as if he were facing something unreasonable. Elias took a deep breath. He spoke slowly. "I'm on a flight to Boston. I have an important meeting at 10. I think all the paperwork is in order." Mark crossed his arms. "Until I verify this, I can't let you on board. Step aside, please." The noise in the waiting room seemed to die down. The young clerk from earlier bowed her head, avoiding Elias's eyes. He took a step back, still holding the ticket. The morning light shone on the glass, reflecting his dark suit, quiet but strong. A security guard approached. "Sir, we need you to wait over there for a moment." Elias did not respond. He just nodded. "I will wait. But can you tell me the reason?" The guard looked at Mark. Mark replied quickly. "Standard security procedure. Behind." A few passengers shook their heads in disapproval. A middle-aged white woman watched the scene and whispered to her husband, "Every time. It's always the same thing." Elias heard. He looked out the window, where the light reflected off the silver fuselage. There was no anger in his eyes, only the calm of a man who had experienced. In his head, he heard his father's voice again, far away. "Son, sometimes they don't see you. They see the skin before they see the person." Elias took a deep breath. He still held the briefcase and said nothing more. But beneath his thumb, he touched the edge of the phone. It was an unconscious gesture, but enough to give the audience a sense of what was about to happen. The loudspeaker rang out, "Last call for Flight 328 to Boston." Elias looked up, his eyes calm. He walked slowly to the counter, his voice low and clear. "Ellison, I understand the process, but I also want you to understand this respect is not a privilege. It is the standard." Mark started to reply, but his voice was lower, calmer, like someone stating the obvious, "I don't want anyone to get in trouble. I just want everything done right." He finished speaking and smiled, a smile that made the other person slightly embarrassed. For a moment, Mark felt embarrassed, but he still did not move. Elias turned away and stood beside him. Little did he know that, in a few minutes, the entire airline system would grind to a halt because of one call, just one. The final shot of this part is of him looking out at the runway. A plane is taking off. The sunlight is on his face. The light is cold, but in his eyes there is another light calm, strong and unpredictable. Elias Carter left the line and found an empty seat near the glass door. Outside, the early morning sun shone on the tarmac, reflecting silver on the window frame. Everything was like a silent film, only the occasional sound of the airport loudspeaker interrupting, reminding people that time was still passing. He put his briefcase beside him, took off his leather gloves, and gently stroked the face of his watch. It was an antique watch, round face, dark leather strap, a small scratch right at the number 12. He looked at it, like looking at an old friend. A girl of about 8 sat across from him, her eyes large and clear. She looked at him for a moment, then smiled softly. Elias smiled back. Beside her was her mother, a brown-skinned woman in a long coat. She pulled her daughter close, speaking softly enough for Elias to hear. "Sweetheart, don't stare." "Okay." The girl nodded, but still said softly, "Mom, he looks like someone important." Elias chuckled. "It's okay," he said softly. "Your mother is right, but also a little wrong. Everyone is important. It's just that sometimes people forget that." The mother looked up, her eyes slightly surprised, then smiled back. There was something in his voice that made people want to listen. Soft, but powerful. He turned to look at the runway. In the distant sound of the engines, his mind drifted back to another time where it all began. Detroit. 1992. Small apartment in a working-class neighborhood, peeling paint, the sound of trains rumbling at night. Elias, then 10 years old, sat at a table, the desk lamp flickering. His father, Richard Carter, dressed in his engineer uniform, was repairing an old electronic circuit. He was a maintenance engineer for a local airline company. His mother, Linda, had just finished her shift at the hospital, still in her nurse's gown, and was reheating cold soup. "Son," his father said, not taking his eyes off the circuit board, "do you know what this is for?" "Yes." "It controls the cabin door." Richard smiled. "Yes, it's just a small circuit, but if it fails, the whole flight can be grounded." He put his hand on his son's shoulder. "No detail is too small if it affects people." Elias remembered those words forever. Later, when his father was terminated because of layoffs, he heard his mother say in the kitchen, her voice choked, "It's not that they don't want your father. They just don't want anyone like him there anymore." Elias did not ask further, but in his heart, one thing was engraved: if the system is unfair, create another one. Years later, he studied information technology at Georgia Tech and went to work for a cybersecurity company. He discovered that everything in the modern world has a vulnerability, but not everyone sees it. After 10 years, he and two friends founded SkyLink Security Systems, specializing in aviation security and access control. From a small group, his company gradually became a name that many major airlines had to rely on. They trusted him because he worked carefully and because he never abused that power. Elias has always been quiet and reserved, but when he needs to be, his voice can silence a conference room. He's not a TV celebrity, he's not loud in interviews, but everyone in the tech world knows when SkyLink signs a contract. They're bringing real security. And this morning, that same system is protecting North Star Airways, the plane he's about to board. The loudspeaker sounded again. "Attention passengers. Flight 328 will begin final boarding in 10 minutes. Elias looked at his watch, then at the door. Mark Ellison was still talking to security, occasionally pointing at him. Mark's eyes were filled with doubt, mixed with confusion. Perhaps in his mind, Elias couldn't be a first-class passenger, couldn't be the CEO of the company they were hiring for security. He was silent. Memories of his father, of his mother, of snowy days in Detroit came back to him. He remembered his mother's hand, always holding his tightly as she walked him to school. "Don't let anyone tell you you're not good enough," she said, "but don't let anger control you." Now, in the crowded airport, those words echoed in his head. Elias pulled out his phone and opened his calendar. The meeting in Boston was clearly visible: SkyLink, partnership conference with North Star Airways, 10:00 a.m. He chuckled. What a strange coincidence. A message popped up from Tanya Brooks, his communications advisor. "Boss, are you on your way? The North Star execs are already here." He typed back, "Almost boarding. Minor delay. I'll explain later." The little girl looked at him again and asked, "Uncle, are you going to work?" "Yes, I am going to work." "What do you do?" Elias thought for a moment, then replied, "You protect people on planes, to keep them safe." The little girl tilted her head, like a superhero. He smiled gently. "No, I just fix small things, so others don't get into trouble." That sentence seemed to echo what my father had said years ago. A small circuit, a seemingly meaningless detail, could change the entire flight. The boarding gate began to open again. Mark Ellison looked at Elias, then away. He still seemed unconvinced. Elias stood up, grabbed his briefcase, and straightened his jacket. Light streamed through the glass. Reflecting off the clock, the minute hand read 8:01. Only an hour had passed. But in his mind, a decision had already been made. He was not angry, nor did he want to lecture anyone. But sometimes silence must know how to speak. He pulled out his phone and dialed a few numbers. An automated voice came on the other end. SkyLink Security Systems. Please confirm security protocol level. He whispered, Omega standby. Authorization code Carter 7. The voice replied, Protocol Omega is now on standby. He hung up, put the phone in his pocket, and let out a long breath. No one paid any attention to him. Only the little girl, still looking after him, waved slightly. Good luck. Mr. Elias smiled. Thank you. Then he turned away, his gaze on Gate 47 where Mark was still talking on the walkie-talkie. Everything looked normal, but Elias knew something was moving in the silence. A gentle breeze blew through the hallway, fluttering the corner of his coat. In that moment, the audience felt two things, serenity and hidden power, like an undercurrent. Quiet, but enough to change the entire system. In the distance, the loudspeaker sounded again, final boarding call for Flight 328 to Boston. Elias looked at his watch. The seconds were still ticking. He said softly, as if to himself, No detail is too small when it comes to people. Detroit, 1992. Winter came early. Snow fell silently, blanketing the roofs of the East Side workers' quarters. On a small street with a rusted sign, Jefferson, Block 12. The Carters' apartment was lit all night. A faint yellow light shone from the window, like a lamp against the cold of the city. Little Elias sat by the fireplace, an old aviation magazine in his hand. The pages were frayed, but he read them with rapt attention. On the table, his father was taking apart a circuit board, each tiny component like a piece of a puzzle. See this, Richard said, his voice deep and warm. It controls the cabin doors when the plane is about to take off. If one screw is wrong, the whole flight can stop. Elias looked closely, his eyes shining. Is it so small, but so important? Father, yes, everything has its reason for existence. Like you, they may not see you, but if you know what you do, you will be important to this world. His father looked up and smiled, a tired but gentle smile. Outside, the sound of a train passed by. In the small kitchen, his mother, Linda, was cooking a late dinner. Steam rose from a pot of soup, the aroma filling the apartment. Richard, have your dinner, and you too. Elias, it's late. Yes, I'll be right there. Elias replied, still watching his father mend a wire. Linda brought the pot of soup to the table. She was still wearing her nurse's uniform, the collar still wrinkled from a long day of work. She took off her cap, smoothed her hair, and smiled at the father and son. My two men, always busy with things with wires. Richard smiled, put down the circuit board, and pulled his chair back to the table. If we don't understand these things, who will keep the planes flying safely for everyone? Linda sighed softly, her voice a mixture of pride and worry. It's easy for you to say, but at work they don't listen to you. People only see what they want to see. Richard was silent for a moment. He knew his wife was right. In the factory, people like him, black, outspoken, unbowed, were easily sidelined. He simply said, "Let's do it right. Our son will do better." Linda turned to Elias and stroked his hair. Do you hear me? Don't let anyone tell you that you're not good enough, but don't let anger blind you. You have to learn to be patient. Elias nodded. He did not fully understand his mother's words at the time. But years later, looking back, he saw that they had become a guiding principle in his life. Another winter day. The phone rang incessantly. Elias was studying when he found his mother sitting on the floor, her eyes red. Dad had been fired. The reason was department restructuring, but everyone knew it wasn't. A younger, less experienced white engineer had been promoted to replace him. That night, Father said nothing. He took off the name tag Richard Carter, maintenance engineer, and placed it on the table, then went out onto the porch. Elias looked through the window and saw snow falling on Father's shoulders. He stood there for a long time, as if talking to the gray sky. The next day, he took Elias to the old factory. The iron gate was locked. A no-entry sign was hung on the fence. Richard pointed toward the factory and said, "See everything in there. Every nail, every fan blade is made by humans. But there's one thing they can't buy, self-respect." Elias asked quietly, "Does self-respect make you fly?" He laughed, bent down, and stroked his son's head. "No, but if you keep it, you'll never fall." Life became harder after that. Linda worked the night shift. Richard fixed appliances at home. Elias helped his father with his soldering irons, learning every little symbol, every evening. They sat together at the old wooden table, dimly lit but warm. When Elias was 16, his father gave him a watch. "I bought it for you when you got your first paycheck," he said. "It's yours now. When you're in trouble, look at it. Remember, time is no one's friend, but how you use it is." 2 years later, Richard died in a car accident on his way to work. Linda hugged the watch and cried. Elias was silent for 3 days. After the funeral, he put the watch on the table and watched the second hand still ticking. And from that day on, he vowed to create something so that people like his father would not be rejected just because of who they were. He studied information technology on a scholarship at Georgia Tech. As the only black student in his class, he had to justify every grade, every project. One time, a professor asked him, "Are you sure you're cut out for this? It's so dry." He simply replied, "I don't need to be cut out for it. I just need to understand how it works." Elias graduated with honors. He joined a security company and rose to lead developer. He was fascinated by how air traffic control systems worked, how data was encrypted, how humans depended on technology to travel safely. He understood one thing: the modern world did not collapse because of bombs, but because of bad code and people with bad faith. When SkyLink Security Systems was founded, many people were skeptical. A security company run by a black man. Will they believe it? Elias just laughed. He didn't need them to believe it. He needed them to see results. And after just 2 years, SkyLink signed its first contract with a regional airline. Then, step by step, it became a partner with major airlines. He chose to live a simple life, keeping a low profile. True power is not in control, but in the ability to keep things safe, even when no one knows your name, he said in a rare interview. That year, when North Star Airways offered to partner with them to upgrade their security systems, he was personally involved in the implementation. Data, processes, and control networks all flowed through SkyLink. Elias knew that with a single command, he could shut down their entire operation. But he never thought about doing it until this morning. As Elias sat in the Atlanta airport, watching the suspicious manager, Mark Ellison, rummaging through his paperwork, he saw more than a rude man. He saw the same look that had cost his father his job. He saw the injustice his mother had endured for years. He knew he could walk away, silent as usual, but something inside him urged him to, not to take revenge, but to force the system to look at itself. He glanced at the watch on his wrist. The minute hand had just moved past 7. The morning light shone on the glass, reflecting off his eyes, a part of his father, a part of his mother, all there. And he knew it was time to do what his parents had wished for all their lives, to make justice not just words, but actions. The watch on Elias's wrist was still ticking, the small hands ticking softly like a breath. In the cold morning air, sunlight filtered through the airport window, falling obliquely on the watch face, reflecting a pale yellow light. He gently turned his wrist, remembering the day his mother gave it to him, the day when time seemed to stop. It was the summer of his 18th year, the day of his high school graduation. The school was in the suburbs of Detroit, and the courtyard was packed. Linda was wearing a navy blue dress, her hair pulled back, and she was holding a small bouquet of flowers. When Elias stepped out of line, wearing a black cape and square cap, and saw his mother smiling brightly, all the noise melted away. After the ceremony, they sat in a small coffee shop on the corner of Woodward Avenue. Linda and her mother had always stopped by after their night shift. She put her cup of coffee down on the table and looked at her son, her eyes gentle and firm. "Elias, I have a gift for you." She opened her bag and took out a watch. The glass was slightly fogged, the leather strap dark. Elias recognized it immediately as the watch his father had worn. He looked at his mother, surprised. "Mom, this is Dad's." Linda nodded. "Yes, but now it's mine. Your father believes time is the only thing that is fair, rich or poor, white or black. Everyone has 24 hours a day. It's all about how you use it." She paused, her voice deepening. "You're going away. The world out there is not kind. There will be people who look at you and think you don't belong there. But if you keep your heartbeat as steady as this clock, you'll get through it all." Elias held the watch in his hand, feeling the warmth of his mother's hand. He asked softly, "Are you afraid, Mom, to let me go?" Linda smiled. "Yes, I've been afraid since the day your father died, but fear cannot feed dreams. Go. And remember, don't let anger guide you. Let your dignity and intelligence do the work." At that time, Elias did not fully understand the meaning of that sentence. He only knew that from that day on, he wore the watch every day, never leaving his wrist. It not only counted time, but also counted every decision. Every moment he chose to keep silent instead of getting angry, chose to do instead of talking. Back in the present, in the crowded Atlanta airport. Elias checked his watch again. 8:15 a.m. The flight to Boston took off in an hour. He leaned back in his seat, his eyes on the tarmac. The reflection of the light made the watch's face glow, like a reminder, don't forget why you started. Mark Ellison was still talking to the security guard. He glanced at Elias from time to time, his eyes a mixture of wariness and confusion. Perhaps, in his mind, things were still unclear. Elias wasn't angry, but he felt a weight on his heart. Not because he was offended, but because he realized the system was still the same, still judging people by their outer shells. An older woman sat next to him, her face kind. She watched him quietly for a moment, then asked, "Are you waiting for the Boston flight?" "Yes, ma'am." She smiled. "Me too. North Star is always late, never on time." Elias chuckled. Maybe they need a test today. What test, she asked. He shook his head. Just a way to remind them that every passenger is a human being. The woman looked at him thoughtfully. You sound like my father. He used to drive the subway in Detroit. He said, no matter what class of ticket you buy, when the train derails, it hurts everyone the same. Elias nodded. That's true. He was silent for a moment, looking down at the clock, remembering his mother. During her years as a nurse, her hands were chapped from antiseptics. Her eyes were dark from night shifts. But every morning she smiled, made coffee, and saw him off to school. She never complained, only telling him one thing. Don't ever let yourself become bitter, because when you are bitter, you will not see the way out. Once, early in his career, his company was turned down for a contract because the owner didn't believe a team of people of color could secure the system. He called his mother, disappointed. Linda simply asked, Did you do your best? Yes, Mom. Then don't feel bad. Someone else will need what you do. A week later, they signed a new contract. That night, Elias called his mother back. You're right. She laughed into the phone. It's not that you're right. It's that I didn't give up. The airport loudspeaker sounded, interrupting his thoughts. Attention passengers, Flight 328 to Boston will be delayed due to system verification. Some passengers sighed, some groaned. Elias raised his head slightly. His eyes reflected the light from the announcement board. A strange feeling arose in his heart. Everything was starting to move, very gently, like a new wind. He received a text message from Tanya Brooks. Boss, North Star just called. They're asking if we're running a system scan. Something's slowing their boarding network. Elias read the message, not replying. He put his phone back in his pocket. His lips pursed slightly, his eyes calm. The little girl from earlier ran past again, holding her mother's hand. When she saw Elias, she stopped, smiled, and said loudly, Uncle, your watch is so beautiful. He bent down, holding out his wrist for the little girl to see. Thank you. It's very old, but it still keeps time. The mother pulled her child away, smiling at him. Elias watched them disappear into the crowd. A simple image, but it reminded him of his mother, who had held his hand at the Detroit train station years ago. He closed his eyes for a few seconds, as if hearing her voice somewhere. When you have to choose the one that makes the world better, even if just a little. When he opened his eyes, he saw Mark approaching, his face tense. Sir, I just got word from our headquarters. There's a system slowed down across all our check-in terminals. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? Elias looked at him, his eyes calm. I'm just waiting to board the plane. Mark narrowed his eyes, then left. Elias watched. He knew what was coming, and he knew he wouldn't stop. But in his heart, he felt no resentment, only peace. Peace like the way his mother's eyes looked to the future. He touched the watch again. The second hand still moved, slow and steady. And he knew that the watch was not just a memory, but a heartbeat of patience, a link to all the goodness his mother had believed in. Another voice came through the loudspeaker, deep and strange attention, due to a system-wide maintenance update. All North Star flights are temporarily on hold. The air in the terminal seemed to stop. Voices began to rise. Mark turned, alarmed. Elias was still sitting there, looking out at the runway. The watch on his wrist reflected the airport lights. His face was calm in the light, but deep in his eyes. A fire burned, a fire fueled by love, pride, and the memory of his mother who believed that justice could be built with patience. The loudspeakers echoed throughout the waiting room due to technical difficulties. Flight 328 is temporarily delayed. We apologize for the inconvenience. The announcement was repeated twice. The female voice was even, trying to remain calm, but the crowd began to stir. Some passengers frowned, others groaned at being late. Phones rang, children cried, and people spoke loudly, creating a cacophony of noise. Elias Carter remained seated in the window seat, his hands clasped together. He looked out at the runway, where the planes were stationary. The sun had risen higher, reflecting off the glass. Unbeknownst to anyone, while the rest of the airport was in chaos, he felt a strange sense of peace. Mark Ellison walked quickly towards him, his voice harsh. "Sir, this is really a strange coincidence. All of North Star's check-in system stopped working at the same time, and only our route was affected the most. I need to know if you had anything to do with it." Elias looked up, his eyes calm. "I'm a passenger, Mr. Ellison. I don't work here." Mark huffed. "I'm not stupid, sir. I did my research. I know who you are. Elias Carter, CEO of SkyLink Security Systems. Your company runs our security software." There was a tense silence between them. Elias looked at him and slowly replied, "It's nice that you finally recognized me." Mark hesitated, then lowered his voice. "I was just doing my job. I didn't mean to offend." Elias remained seated, his voice soft but sharp. "The problem isn't your intentions. It's the habits of a system that makes people like me have to prove that we belong where we shouldn't have to prove it." A middle-aged woman nearby heard this and nodded slightly. A few other passengers also began to talk. Mark felt like he was losing control. He turned back to call the central office, his voice trembling slightly. "We need SkyLink technicians to confirm immediately. The encryption system is not responding." Elias looked at the dashboard. All North Star flights were marked delayed. Red text was appearing in every column. He knew the Omega Standby command was running as designed a system integrity check, but without his authentication code, everything was locked down. No one could log in. No one could reboot. The little girl from earlier reappeared with her mother, standing in line to ask the staff. Her mother frowned, her voice weary. "They said there was a technical problem, but no one knows when it will fly again." She turned to Elias, recognized him, and smiled. "Uncle, is the plane broken?" He shook his head slightly. "No, they just need to do a little check to make sure it's safe." "So, will I make it to my birthday in Boston?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. Elias smiled, his voice warm. "I will make it. Sometimes, stopping for a while is the only way to go further." The mother nodded slightly at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. Only Mark stood nearby, unable to understand why this man remained so calm. From a distance, a group of security personnel approached. One of them said, "Mr. Carter, we have been asked to invite you to a private room for work." Elias looked at them and nodded slightly. Of course. The security room was behind the check-in area. The light was cold white, and the smell of disinfectant lingered. A federal security officer in a gray shirt sat across from him. "Mr. Carter, our aviation security system is down. North Star believes your company may be involved. Can you explain?" Elias looked straight ahead, his voice slow. "There's no problem. It's just the system doing a safety check. Following emergency procedures. If anything seems unusual, it's because they never considered the possibility of being checked. Are you saying this is routine maintenance? No. This is emergency maintenance to see if they're actually following through on their safety commitments to passengers. The security officer raised an eyebrow. Who authorized you to activate that procedure? Elias replied, his eyes never leaving him. The contract. Clause 12, Safety Section. SkyLink reserves the right to perform a system-wide audit when it detects a possible violation of security or service ethics. I discovered it this morning. The room was silent for a few seconds. The security guard glanced at his watch, then said, "Can you stop that process?" Elias smiled slightly. "I can, but I won't. Not until they understand that respect is not a formality." Meanwhile, outside the lobby, the media began to spread the news. A local reporter was filming a video. His voice agitated. All North Star Airways flights across the country are being delayed due to a system failure. Some passengers said it started right after a black passenger was denied boarding in first class at the Atlanta airport. The news spread like wildfire. Social media exploded. The hashtag #NorthStarIncident topped Twitter. Thousands of people commented, shared, and were outraged. They talked about discrimination, about how if he didn't have power, maybe no one would care. Tanya Brooks, from the SkyLink office, kept calling. Elias didn't answer. He just looked at his reflection in the glass, still, but with a sea of thoughts in his eyes. He remembered his mother's words, "Don't let anger lead you, but don't be silent in the face of injustice." A North Star technician walked in and reported to the security guard the main system is inaccessible. SkyLink is on full lockdown. They are the only operator with decryption rights. The security guard turned to Elias. "So, what do you want now?" Elias replied, his voice low but clear, "I want a conversation with the CEO of North Star. Not to threaten, but to fix something that has been broken for a long time." The scene shifted to the lobby. Mark Ellison stood in the middle of the chaos, his phone ringing. He looked around, saw passengers taking videos, criticizing. A colleague whispered, "The CEO is coming." Mark felt his stomach tighten. He knew things were getting out of hand. Elias was led back to the waiting area. He sat down on the same chair where the sunlight still shone. The little girl was sitting on her mother's lap, looking sad. He waved his hand slightly. The little girl smiled weakly. Elias bent down and whispered to the mother, "Thank you for your smiles. Sometimes a smile is a reminder that there is still hope in this world." An employee approached and whispered, "Mr. Carter, the CEO of North Star is on his way. They want to see you." Elias nodded. "Good." Outside the window, the sun was high in the sky. Its light reflected off the runway, bright and cold. His watch read exactly 9:00. In an hour, the entire airline would have to face the truth. He closed his eyes for a few seconds. In his head, his father's voice echoed, "No detail is too small if it affects people." And his mother's voice followed, "When you have to choose, choose the one that makes the world better, even if only a little." Elias opened his eyes. His gaze was bright, determined. He was not doing this just for himself. He was doing it for those who had been silent for too long, for his father, for his mother, for everyone who had ever been forced to stand aside because of the color of their skin. Somewhere, an airport siren sounds. A new chapter in the dialogue between justice and power is beginning. The atmosphere in the Atlanta Airport Emergency Conference Room was thick. On the table, a series of phones rang incessantly. Laptop screens flashed with error messages. System access denied. Authorization required. Amidst it all, Elias Carter sat still. The white light reflected on his face, half bright and half dark. His eyes were calm, without fear, but deep within. There was a quiet wave. The door swung open. A tall, gray-haired man walked in. Gray suit, black tie, the hard face of a man accustomed to power. It was Richard Montgomery, CEO of North Star Airways. Behind him were two assistants and Mark Ellison, whose face was still pale. Montgomery walked to the desk and looked straight at Elias. "Mr. Carter, I hear my entire system is down, and it seems only you can restore it. Can you tell me what's going on?" Elias didn't stand up, his voice steady, deep and clear. "Hello, Mr. Montgomery. I can restore it. But before we do, perhaps we should talk about why it stopped." Montgomery frowned, looking around. "Why? The only reason I can think of is that my passengers are stranded in 12 airports, and every minute that passes I'm losing hundreds of thousands of dollars." Elias looked at him, his gaze unwavering. "So, if I told you that it was a price to buy back the respect you've lost over the years, would you find it expensive?" The conference room was silent. The only sound was the steady whir of the fan. Montgomery sneered. "I don't have time for moralizing. If you're trying to get a ransom, just say it." Elias leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. "I don't want your money. North Star has contracted with SkyLink to protect its security system. But real security isn't just about keeping out hackers. It's also about keeping out human error. This morning, your people decided I wasn't qualified to fly first class, even though my ticket was valid, even though my name was on your partnership agreement. Do you understand?" Mark Ellison bowed his head, his face red. Montgomery glanced at him, then back at Elias. "If my staff mishandled the situation, I'll look into it. But no one has the right to cripple the entire company over a minor incident." Elias looked at him, his eyes sharp but not hostile. "A minor incident. To me, that's more than a ticket hold. It's your system working the way it was programmed, the bias that's become the software running under the hood of this company culture." An aide started to speak, but Montgomery raised his hand. He took a deep breath, lowering his voice. "Mr. Carter, I understand what you mean, but you have to stop this. Thousands of people are stuck. The media is all over them. We can deal with this later, privately." Elias shook his head. "No, sir. Your problem isn't in the closet. It's out there where normal people are treated like criminals just because they're different. If you really want to fix the system, we need to talk about the thing you've never dared to talk about: justice." Montgomery was silent for a few seconds, then spoke slowly. "What do you want?" Elias replied, "I want you to sign an agreement. Not with me, but with your passengers. A commitment to change a complete overhaul of our hiring process, mandatory diversity and inclusion training, and the creation of an independent board to oversee how North Star treats its employees and customers." Montgomery frowned. "You want me to turn our airline into an ethics classroom?" Elias said calmly. "No. I want you to turn it back into an airline, one where people fly, not are judged before they board." The air was thick. All eyes were on the two men in the center, one representing old power, the other representing new justice. Montgomery leaned back, arms crossed, his voice cold. "If I refuse," Elias looked at his watch, "in 2 hours, your automated systems will go into national defense mode. All North Star planes will be forced to make emergency landings, and the FAA will intervene, and I'll just sit here and wait for them to ask why." Montgomery looked at him for a long time. Then he laughed, but there was a helpless smile. "You are like my father, a man who believed he could change the world with his ideas. But the world is run by money," Elias replied, his voice light as air. "Yes, but money cannot buy back trust when it is gone." There was a long pause. Finally, Montgomery exhaled and adjusted his tie. "I'll talk to the board. If they agree, I'll sign. Now, let's get the system back up. Please." Elias stood, his eyes still calm. "Once you sign, the system will be back up. Not before." He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. A familiar female voice answered Tanya Brooks. "Boss, the press is pouring into North Star headquarters. Do you want me to release the video?" Elias said quietly. "Not yet. Just keep it ready." Tanya understood. He hung up and put the phone down on the table. The room was silent. Montgomery looked at Elias, then at the clock on the wall. With each passing minute, the light outside the window changed. "Finally," he said softly, "I don't think you're cruel." "Carter." Elias looked at him, his voice low. "I'm not cruel, sir. I'm just teaching your system a lesson my father taught me. No detail is small if it affects people." The door opened and light flooded in. The noise outside grew louder. The media was there. Flashbulbs flashing. Elias turned away, leaving Montgomery there, the man who thought he was in control, now forced to listen. Elias stepped out into the hallway and looked up at the electronic board. All North Star flights were still red with the word "delayed." He looked at his watch, the second hand still moving steadily. He didn't know if he had just saved the world or caused chaos. But he did know one thing. Silence is sometimes the most powerful weapon, and today he had used it at the right time. Outside. The crowd was still noisy, but amidst it all, Elias walked, slowly, like someone who had just fulfilled a promise to the past. Afternoon had fallen over North Star Airways Chicago headquarters. In a conference room on the 42nd floor, yellow lights reflected off the glass walls, reflecting nervous faces. Documents were piled on tables, and phones rang incessantly. Executives argued, their voices mixed with worry, fear, and anger. Richard Montgomery sat at the head of the table, his face stony. He had just returned from Atlanta, where a meeting with Elias Carter had changed everything. The airline had lost tens of millions of dollars since that morning. But what concerned him more was its reputation, something he had believed was unshakable. A CFO slammed his fist on the table. "We're under attack. Richard, a black CEO wants to use our systems to blackmail us, and you're just sitting here listening to him lecture us on ethics." Montgomery raised his head, his voice low. "Not blackmail. He wants us to change." Another voice rang out. Dryly, "Change what?" "We don't have a problem. This is just a media accident. We need to get our systems back up and hire a lawyer." Montgomery looked out the window at the red sunset that had blanketed the buildings. He remembered Elias's eyes calm, no hate, just absolute faith that what he was doing was right. He took a deep breath, then said quietly, "Do you know how he could bring down the entire system with one command?" No one answered, because we put him in charge of security but never really treated him as a partner. He answered himself, and this morning, one of our employees made it public. This is no longer a technical issue. This is a crisis of confidence. A silence fell, A female HR manager spoke up. Maybe Carter is right. We need to do something to prove that North Star is not heartless. I saw the video in Atlanta. The way the staff handled that passenger was truly disgraceful. The CFO sneered. Are you going to bow down to a man who froze an airline? If we give in, the shareholders will kill this company. Montgomery stood up and walked slowly to the window. No, he said, his voice low and steady. If we do nothing, it will be the silence that will kill the company. He turned back, his eyes cold and steady. I met Carter. He didn't ask for money. He didn't threaten us. He just wanted us to admit that discrimination still exists and to fix it. He wanted us to sign a reform pledge. I think we should do it. The room erupted in murmurs. A male voice said, Are you serious? Richard. A national airline making a commitment to an individual, Montgomery looked straight at him. Not to individuals, to justice itself. There was a long silence. Rain pattered on the glass. Everyone knew if they signed. They risked losing the trust of the conservative shareholders. If they did not, they would lose the trust of the public. Montgomery turned to his assistant. Prepare a press conference and connect with Carter. I want to talk to him right away. At the Atlanta airport, Elias sat in a quiet waiting room. Tanya Brooks was on the video call, her voice strained. Both are on the news. CNN, BBC, and social media are talking about you. Some are calling you a hero. Some are calling you a cyber terrorist. Elias chuckled. They're both wrong. I just want them to stop long enough to see themselves. Tanya looked at him, her eyes both worried and admiring. Are you sure you're not going too far? Elias was silent for a few seconds, then said, I used to think justice would come from the courts or the media, but it turns out that sometimes all it takes is a system shutdown to get people to listen. The phone rang. The screen showed a name, Richard Montgomery. Elias picked up. Mr. Carter, Montgomery said, his voice weary but no longer arrogant. I've spoken to the board. We agree to your terms. But I want to know, what will you do with this power? Do you want to be admired or trusted? Elias replied softly. I just want to make sure that tomorrow morning, when a black child gets on your flight, he won't be looked at as if he's out of place. There was silence on the other end of the line. Montgomery said softly, I understand. I will sign. Then the system will be restored. Elias replied, But remember, this commitment is not just to save the company, but to save its soul. He hung up, took a deep breath. Then he opened his phone and entered the verification code. The screen read Omega Protocol, terminated. The entire North Star system rebooted. Within minutes, flights began to resume, the electronic board gradually changing from red to green. The airport loudspeaker sounded, this time soft and clear. Flight 328 to Boston, now boarding. The passengers applauded. Mark Ellison, standing far away, gave Elias a long look. As Elias passed, he whispered, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Elias stopped and looked at him. It's okay. The important thing is that you said it. He continued walking, his footsteps echoing on the bright tiles. The little girl ran over, smiling brightly. Uncle, the plane is flying again. I'm going to my birthday party soon. Elias bent down and gently touched the little girl's hair. See, everything can change, if only people are willing to listen. The mother took her child's hand and smiled at him. Thank you, Mr. Carter. Elias nodded. No need to thank me. Thank yourselves for still believing. As he boarded the plane, The last light of day streamed through the windows. He looked at his old watch, the second hand still ticking. In that moment, he thought of his father, his mother, of all the people he had looked down on. He didn't know how the world would change, but at least today he had done his part. In Chicago, Montgomery signed the pledge. Cameras rolled. His voice boomed at a press conference. North Star Airways apologizes for what happened. Today, we are beginning a comprehensive program of fairness and respect across our entire system. Elias heard the news on the flight. The passengers around him applauded. He just looked out the window, where the sunset covered the clouds, the orange-gold light blending into the sky. He smiled slightly and whispered, "Thank you, Mom. I didn't let anger guide me." The plane began to taxi, its engines roaring softly. The sky opened up before us, and there a new chapter was being written, not just for North Star, but for all those forced to wait for justice to take flight. 3 days after North Star's system was restored, the U.S. media was still reeling. News of the Atlanta airport incident was all over TV channels, online newspapers, podcasts, and social media. Headlines kept popping up. The man who stopped an entire airline, from a passenger denied boarding to a symbol of digital justice, Elias Carter became the most searched name of the week. The image of him sitting silently in the lobby, the light reflecting off the antique clock face, spread at a dizzying speed. People edited the video, added background music, commented on all sides. Some called him a modern hero. Others criticized him for abusing power. But for Elias, all that noise was just the wind outside. He knew he didn't do it to be famous. He only did it for his father, his mother, for all those who have never been heard. At the SkyLink office, Tanya Brooks walked into the conference room and set her laptop down on the table. "Boss, we have over 20 interview requests from CNN to Forbes. Do you want to answer them?" Elias continued to look out the window, where the sunlight reflected off the glass of the building. "No. Let's let our actions speak for themselves. But if we stay silent, they'll make up their own story." He turned back, smiling slightly. "So let them. Everyone hears a part of the story. But the important thing is that they start talking about the right issues." Tanya sighed and sat down. "You know, I watched the video. When you were stopped at the gate by the staff, your eyes weren't angry, they were sad. Did you know this day would come?" Elias was silent for a few seconds before replying. "I don't know, Tanya, but I always felt that there would come a time when I had to choose between staying silent and speaking up. And that morning, I just did what I had to do." Across the country, Richard Montgomery sat in his spacious office, facing a stack of emails from customers. Some thanked the company for admitting their mistakes and promising to change. Others were angry and threatening to switch to another company. But what stuck with him most was a handwritten note from a 10-year-old girl, Uncle Montgomery. "I saw the video about the black man and your airline. I think if you sincerely apologize, everyone will forgive you. Anyone can make mistakes, as long as they dare to correct them." Montgomery took the letter and read it over and over again. He felt a strange sensation, a mixture of relief and shame. He remembered Elias's voice in Atlanta. Money can't buy back trust when it's gone. He looked out the window at the Chicago sky, sparkling in the afternoon sun, and for the first time in years, he asked himself, "What did I forget along the way?" Meanwhile, at his home in Boston, Elias was making coffee. The house was small and tidy, with family photos on the walls, an old photo of his father in his engineer uniform, a gentle smile, greasy hands. He put down his coffee cup, sat down on the sofa, and turned on the TV. On the screen was a news report. North Star Airways officially announces Sky for All, an initiative to promote equality in service and employment. The reporter read in a monotone voice, while the image showed Montgomery signing a memorandum of cooperation with the civil rights organization. Elias smiled slightly, not because of victory, but because something was changing. The phone rang. It was Tanya. "Boss, they just invited you to the Technology and Social Justice Conference in Washington. They want you to talk about North Star." Elias thought for a moment. Not to rehash it, right? No. They want you to talk about ethical systems. Are you going? He nodded slightly, though Tanya couldn't see. "Okay, but I won't talk about the past. I'll talk about what we need to do next." 3 weeks later, the Great Hall in Washington, D.C., was ablaze. Hundreds of people from different industries, technology, aviation, education, gathered. On stage, Elias Carter stood before the microphone, carrying no presentation slides. He only carried his father's old watch. His voice boomed warmly. 30 years ago, my father was fired from an aircraft factory just because he was black. That day, I learned that injustice is not only where people are treated badly, but also where people stay silent when they see it." He paused, looking around the room. "Last week, an airline stopped flying, not because the system failed, but because the people in the system forgot that they were serving the people. We can build great technology, but without ethics, all progress is just a tool for coldness." The room fell silent. Elias continued, his voice softer. "I didn't come here to talk about victory. I came here to say that justice is not something we can command, but something we must practice every day, in the way we look at others, listen to them, and respect them." He glanced down at his watch, a smile flickering across his face. Time doesn't stop, but sometimes stopping is the only way to get back on track. The applause was thunderous. Many people stood up, some shed tears. Montgomery was also in the audience, silently applauding. His eyes met Elias's. No longer the look of opponents, but of two people who understood that justice is not about winning or losing, but about walking away from mistakes together. That night, Elias returned to the hotel. He opened the window and looked out at the Washington sky. Under the moonlight, planes flew by, leaving thin streaks of light in the sky. He thought to himself, "Dad, Mom, I finally see something. The world can change. If only someone would stop in the middle of the road and say, 'We can do better.'" He placed the clock on the table, the second hand still running, steady and steady like a heartbeat. The wind blew through the curtains, carrying the chill of the night, but in his heart, everything felt warm. Tomorrow, the world may be noisy again, it may be forgotten, but at least today. Elias Carter left a moment of silence, a moment to remind people that justice is not a concept, but an action. And sometimes, just one person choosing to do the right thing will make the whole system stop to look back at itself. A week after the Washington conference, the Boston sky was a dull gray. A light rain fell, misting the glass windows of the SkyLink office. Elias Carter stood silently by the window, holding a cup of cold coffee. The dim light reflected off his face, half light, half dark, like the turmoil within. On the table, newspapers spread out hero or saboteur, Elias Carter, divisive CEO or symbol of change. A series of commentaries analyzed and dissected his actions, clearly dividing the factions. Some praised his bravery, but many called him a dangerous fuse and a system manipulator. Tanya Brooks walked in, carrying her laptop and looking worried. "Boss, I just saw the morning news. A group of North Star shareholders are countersuing SkyLink for intentional financial harm. They're asking for hundreds of millions of dollars." Elias nodded slightly, not surprised. "I figured it would come soon." Tanya looked at him, her voice lower. "Do you think you've gone too far?" He was silent for a moment, his eyes distant. "I didn't do it to win. I just wanted them to know what it feels like to be disrespected by a system. But I guess anyone who touches the truth has to pay the price." Tanya sat down in the chair opposite, her voice sincere. "You're not alone. There are millions of people out there who support you. They write letters, send emails, saying your story has inspired them to stand up against injustice at work, in life." Elias smiled slightly, his eyes softening. "Then I think I did the right thing." The door to the office opened. A staff member ran in, his face panicked. "Mr. Carter, there are protesters in front of the building. They have signs that say, 'Stop corporate tyranny.' They say you threaten free enterprise." Tanya was startled. Elias put down his cup and calmly asked, "Is anyone hurt?" "No, but the police are on their way." Elias nodded. "Let them express themselves. Change always scares people before they understand." He put on his coat and walked out into the hallway. Tanya stood up quickly. "Where are you going?" "Down there. I want to see them." Down in the lobby. The rain was drizzling, the wind was biting. A group of people gathered outside the door, holding up banners. Some were shouting his name and criticizing him. Others were filming videos. When Elias appeared, the crowd quieted down. He had no bodyguards, just stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes calm. "You have no right to destroy someone else's company just because you were denied a seat," shouted an elderly man. Elias stepped up a step, his voice barely audible. "I didn't destroy anyone. I just stopped a system so it could look in the mirror. If you think that's destruction, perhaps the mirror reflects what you fear most." The words silenced the crowd for a few seconds. A young woman in the group stepped forward, her eyes angry but trembling. "But you put thousands of people out of work temporarily. Do you think about them?" Elias looked at her, his voice softening. "Yes, and I think about them every day. It was for them that I did it, because an unjust system will hurt them sooner or later, even if they don't see it today." The woman bowed her head. The crowd began to disperse. Tanya stood at the door, watching the scene. Her eyes filled with something quiet, both pity and admiration. In the evening, when everyone had gone home, Elias sat alone in the office. The rain was pouring down harder. He opened the small wooden box in the desk drawer. Inside was his father's watch. The hands were still running, regularly, but the leather strap was frayed. He turned the glass slightly, remembering his father's words, "No detail is small if it affects people." The phone rang, Richard Montgomery's number. Elias picked up. "Carter, I was watching TV. I know about the lawsuit, if necessary. North Star will confirm that you acted within your contractual rights. We don't want to see you taken down just because you helped us change." Elias smiled slightly. Thank you, but you don't owe me anything. No, Carter, I owe you more than you think. Without you, I wouldn't have realized that fairness isn't just a slogan. It's how you treat people when no one is looking. Elias said quietly. The world doesn't need more bullies, just more listeners. You've started doing that, and that's enough. After hanging up the phone, he sat still for a long time. The rain outside seemed to be endless. In the sound of the rain, he heard his mother's voice echoing, "When you have to pay the price for the truth, don't be afraid, because the truth is never cheap." He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Suddenly, his phone vibrated again, this time with a text message from an unknown address. I was the employee who worked at Gate 47 that day. I was suspended, but I wanted to say thank you. Because of you, I learned what it means to look at others with fair eyes. Elias looked at the message, his eyes shining, not with pride, but with a sense of peace. He replied with just 2 words, "Thank you." Tanya returned to the office, carrying 2 cups of hot tea. "You're still here. Good news, the shareholders have withdrawn their lawsuit. They seem to be afraid of the public backlash." Elias accepted the tea, smiling slightly. "It's all going to be okay. You can't fight what's right forever." Tanya sat down, looking at him intently. "You know, I think the world needs more people like you who stop the system, not with power, but with conviction." Elias laughed warmly. "The thing is, conviction has a price, Tanya, but if I had to do it all over again, I'd do it again." Outside, the rain began to ease, the sky cleared, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement. Elias stood up and looked down the street. A group of young people were holding signs that read, "Justice is the real system update." He smiled slightly. Perhaps, after all, the message had gotten through more than he had thought. He turned off the light and walked out of his office. The Boston sky that night was wide, deep, and still. In the light, Elias Carter, the black man who had once been denied a seat, now became a symbol of something simple. The truth may hurt, but only it can heal the world. Before leaving, he stopped, looked up at the sky, and said softly, as if in a silent prayer, "Father, Mother, I've kept the clock hands running in the right direction." The Boston morning was unusually clear. The early morning sunlight streamed through the glass windows and onto the wooden floor of the SkyLink office. There were no more emergency calls, no more red error messages like before. Everything was quiet, almost normal. But something in Elias Carter's heart was still uneasy. He stood before a whiteboard covered in notes. Numbers, charts, and expansion plans were everywhere. SkyLink was growing rapidly after North Star new customers were coming in. Contracts were being signed, but every time Elias looked at the charts, he found himself asking the same question. Was he really making a difference, or was he just becoming another symbol of the power he had once resisted? Tanya Brooks walked in, briefcase in hand. "Elias, good news. The National Ethics Council has invited you to join its official advisory committee. They want SkyLink to help design an ethical framework for new aviation security systems." Elias nodded, smiling slightly. "That's a good step." Tanya studied him more closely. "But what's keeping you quiet? You should be happy." He turned back, his voice low. "Tanya, sometimes I wonder if we're becoming the very thing we fought against. When power's too great, the line between acting for justice and acting for self becomes blurred." Tanya sat down in the chair opposite, her eyes soft. Elias, you use power to make the world listen, not to rule it. There's a big difference there." He was silent for a few seconds, then nodded. "I know. But power is a double-edged sword. It can cut chains, or it can create new ones." That afternoon, Elias received a call from someone special, Aisha Coleman, an activist he had worked with on a data equality project years earlier. Her voice came through the phone, sharp and direct. "Elias, I've been following the North Star story. You've done a great job, but now I want to ask, would you do the same if you weren't the victim?" The question stopped him. "What do you mean?" Aisha said slowly. "When you're the one being hurt, you fight for justice. But if one day your system causes injustice, would you dare stop it like you did to them?" Elias was silent for a long time, then said softly, "I'm not sure, Aisha, but I want to believe I will." She smiled softly. "I hope you keep that faith, because people are only truly tested when they're in power." After the call, Elias paused. He knew she was right. His power now lay not in his technological prowess, but in the trust of millions of people, and that trust was more fragile than network data. In the afternoon, he visited a vocational training center in the Roxbury area, where SkyLink sponsored a programming program for young people of color. The young faces looked at him with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. A boy stood up and asked Uncle Elias, "If one day people don't believe in you anymore, what will you do?" Elias bent down and smiled gently. "Then I will start over, like when I had nothing. Because the important thing is not that people believe in you, but that you still believe in what you do." That sentence made the room silent. Aisha, who was at the end of the line, looked at him and nodded slightly. Elias felt a warmth in his heart. Perhaps he was still on the right track. That evening, Elias returned home late. The streetlights shone through the window, illuminating the photo of his father on his desk. He sat down, opened his laptop, and wrote a few lines in the electronic diary he kept whenever his emotions were high today. "I realize that justice is not something that is achieved once and for all. It is a daily battle with oneself, to never forget why in the first place. Power is only worth having when we use it to protect the weak, and compassion is only truly strong when we dare to put it before our own interests." Elias paused, staring at the words flashing on the screen. A tear fell onto the keyboard, not from sadness, but from relief. He understood that truth and justice are never complete. They only grow as long as someone continues to hold them. Outside, the night sky was clear. A plane glided by, its lights flashing through the clouds. He thought of the thousands of passengers on board, of the flight attendants, of the people who had protested against him. It was all part of the system, and he had just pressed the pause button at the right moment. The phone vibrated. A message from Montgomery Carter. "Today is the first day of the Sky for All program. On every flight, passengers will see the message you said, 'Respect is not a courtesy, it's a foundation. Thank you for forcing us to change.'" Elias read the message, smiled. He typed back, "No one is forcing anyone. I'm just reminding you that we can all choose a better way." He put the phone down and leaned back in his chair. In the dim light, the old clock on the table ticked steadily. Each tick was like a heartbeat, slow but steady. In the quiet of the night, Elias thought to himself, perhaps the line between power and kindness lies not in actions, but in intentions. When we act for others, power becomes a tool. When we act for ourselves, it becomes a shackle. He turned off the light and looked out over Boston. Distant streaks of light from the airport blended with the night sky. Somewhere, a plane was taking off, and in that moment, Elias Carter knew his journey wasn't over, because the world would have systems that needed to stop, and he would be ready to be the one to push the button, if needed. Boston is entering autumn. The air is chilly. The maple leaves are turning orange and yellow, scattered on the sidewalk. From the 13th floor window of the SkyLink building, Elias Carter looks down at the bustling crowd. Below him is the flow of life, and in his head, hundreds of thoughts are intertwined like a never-ending network of data. The world is changing, but he can feel it. The first cracks are appearing in the light they create. After North Star, SkyLink became a symbol of ethical technology. Large corporations came to learn from him, and governments invited Elias to advise on data fairness projects. The media called him the man who reset American corporate standards. But in each of those accolades, Elias heard echoes of a dangerous thing. When people start to idolize you, they forget that you're only human. That morning, Tanya Brooks brought in a thick file. "Elias, this is an internal audit report. There's something you should look at." Her voice was low, hesitant. Elias opened it. A detail in the data made him pause. A SkyLink customer behavior analysis department had used an algorithm that prioritized demographic profiling, something he had sworn he would never allow. He looked up, his eyes hard. Where did they get this data? Tanya swallowed. From their new partners. They say it's just for accuracy, but in reality, it's segmenting users based on location and race. The words cut through the air like a knife. Elias was silent for a few seconds, then stood up. "Cancel the entire process. Immediately." Tanya looked at him. "If we do that, we'll lose a big contract with Ridgeway Group." "That's fine. I'd rather lose the contract than lose my principles." That afternoon, Elias called an emergency meeting. The department heads sat in rows, their faces tense. He walked in and placed his report on the table. "We've already brought a system to a halt because it was unfair. I can't let SkyLink be another version of that." A technology executive countered. "But, Elias, the market changes fast. Demographic data is the industry standard. If we don't do it, someone else will." Elias looked at him, his eyes calm but firm. "Maybe, but the difference between them and us is that we know what's right, and knowing it and doing it wrong is the scariest thing." The conference room fell silent. Everyone bowed their heads. No one dared to say more. Elias took a deep breath, his voice softening. "I don't blame anyone. I just want to remind everyone that justice is not a slogan on the wall, but a choice every day. If we don't keep it, no one will keep it for us." That night, after everyone had gone home, Elias sat alone. The lights in his room were soft yellow. He looked out, the Boston sky like a black mirror reflecting his inner self. In the silence, a question echoed in his mind. Does every light have its cracks, and it is those cracks that make it real? The phone rang, breaking his train of thought. The name on the screen was Richard Montgomery. He picked up, the voice on the other end warm and friendly. "Carter, I hear about your internal affairs. I just want to say, don't let the weight of the symbol suffocate you. Sometimes you don't have to be perfect to lead. Just be real." Elias chuckled. "You know, I used to think justice was a straight line. Just need to go in the right direction to get there. But now I understand. It's like a wave, up and down, as long as it doesn't break. Montgomery replied, "Then let the wave carry you on. Don't be afraid when the light cracks. That's a sign of truth." After the call, Elias stood up and walked out into the hallway. The office was quiet, save for the dim lights and the wind whistling outside the glass doors. He walked past the posters hanging on the wall. The slogan, "Innovation with Integrity," now seemed to stare at him questioningly. He touched the sign and whispered, "It's not just about innovating with integrity. It's about living with integrity." The next morning, Elias decided to hold an open talk. The entire SkyLink staff was invited, along with the press. When he stepped onto the stage, the spotlight shone directly down on him, making his face glow but not hide the fatigue. When we demand change from the world, we must be willing to change ourselves. He began slowly. Last week, SkyLink discovered a flaw in its data analysis process. I take responsibility. We will fix it. Today, the room fell silent. A few people looked at each other, worried. Elias continued, "Perfection does not exist. Honesty does. I'm not afraid of being wrong. I'm afraid of remaining silent in the face of it. And that is why I'm here." The speech ended with a standing ovation. The video quickly went viral on social media. Instead of criticism, much of the public praised his transparency and courage. One major newspaper headlined Elias Carter, the man who dared to stare into the cracks of light. That evening, Elias returned home and turned on the living room light. The soft light fell on an old photograph of his father. He sat down and closed his eyes. In his mind, he heard his father smile. "You see, light is only truly beautiful when it passes through cracks." He softly replied, "Yes, I see." Outside, leaves were falling in waves. The city was filled with the sound of wind. But Elias felt calm inside. He understood that the journey of justice was not about reaching the destination, but about continuing on, not letting himself get lost. Elias Carter smiled and leaned back in his chair. On the table, the old clock still ticked steadily. The second hand moved slowly, but enough to keep time moving. He knew that as long as the clock's hands kept moving, people's belief in what was right would not stop. 3 months after SkyLink's transparent press conference, the company had regained public confidence. Sales not only recovered, but grew faster than expected. But for Elias Carter, the numbers no longer mattered. He sensed a more subtle change. The people in the organization seemed more real, warmer, less fearful. When he walked into a meeting room, the eyes were no longer evasive or waiting for orders, but confident, sharing. That was what he called the true light. In the morning, sunlight filtered through the glass and shone on a sign bearing SkyLink's motto, "We don't chase perfection. We chase truth." Elias looked at the words and felt relieved. Finally, the company was on the right track, but he knew the path to truth would never be peaceful forever. Tanya Brooks walked into the office, a new stack of papers in hand. "Elias, this is a joint report with Columbia University. They want to launch a national technology ethics training program based on the SkyLink model, and they want you to be the first one." Elias smiled, his voice warm. "An ethics class from the guy who brought down an airline. Sounds interesting." Tanya chuckled. "That's why they chose you. You don't lecture, you tell the story." That afternoon, Elias flew to New York. On the plane, he sat next to a middle-aged man with silver hair and kind eyes. The man spoke. "Mr. Carter, Right, I saw a video of you at the Washington conference. Thank you for what you have done. My daughter is a flight attendant for North Star, and she said that since the Sky for All program started, passengers have been nicer and staff have been more respectful. Elias looked at him and nodded slightly. Thank you for saying that. Sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't create miracles, but it makes others start to believe that miracles are real. The man smiled, his eyes shining like a child's. That evening, Elias stood before the large auditorium at Columbia University. Hundreds of students, faculty, and researchers were waiting for him. He had no notes, only an old watch in his pocket. When the lights came on, he began to speak, his voice deep and warm. I did not come here to preach morality. I came to tell you about a moment. The moment I realized there are two kinds of silence, one of fear and one of peace. I chose peaceful silence when I no longer had to fear that the wrong would replace the right. He paused, looking at the listening audience. Morality is not in a code. It is in how we face the truth, however uncomfortable it may be. When he finished speaking, the students stood up and applauded. A young woman stepped forward, her voice trembling. Elias, I am the daughter of someone who was fired for reporting discrimination at another airline. Your story makes me want to continue studying this field. I want to be the one who designs fairer systems. Elias looked at her, his eyes gentle. Then you are the one who keeps the light. Don't let anyone make you think that light is small, because just one ray is enough to dispel the darkness. The next morning, Elias returned to Boston. In the car, he received a text message from Richard Montgomery. Carter, I just got back from a meeting with my team. You know, the employees who used to discriminate against others are now leading inclusion training. I think we finally understand what you mean. Elias finished reading, leaned back in his chair, and closed his eyes. All the hard work, all the noise, had finally created real change. In the afternoon, he visited a Roxbury vocational center where young black men learn programming and cybersecurity. There was no noise, just the steady tap of a keyboard. When Elias walked in, the children stood up to greet him. A boy ran up, holding a small phone. His voice excited Uncle Elias. I just finished writing a code to check for bias in data. It caught the error, just like you said. Elias bent down and patted the boy on the head. Good. Remember, technology is only as good as the conscience of the people using it. That evening, Elias returned home. The small apartment was still the same, quiet and warm. He sat at his desk and opened his father's wooden box. In it, besides the familiar clock, there was an old piece of paper. He opened it, and it was his father's handwriting. When you are strong enough to make others listen to you, use that strength to remind them to listen to others. Elias read it over and over again, tears falling without realizing it. He looked up and out the window. Boston was ablaze in the night, thousands of lights like stars on the ground. He thought of his father, his mother, Tanya, Montgomery, the girl at Columbia, the boy at Roxbury. They were all, each a little light, and perhaps that was what kept the world from going completely dark. He picked up his phone and sent a message to Tanya. Let's start a new project tomorrow. I want to create a platform called Lightkeepers, where people can share, learn, and monitor each other on technological ethics. Tanya replied almost immediately, I knew you would think of that. No one can keep the light alone. Elias laughed, No one. When the clock struck 12, he placed his hand on the old clock face, the second hand still moving. "Thank you, Father," he whispered. "I have found those who will continue." Outside, Boston was not as quiet as usual tonight. There was laughter, cars, music, and somewhere, the wind blowing softly through the window, but inside Elias, it all turned into a gentle harmony of light, of people, and of the belief that justice, however fragile, could be kept if only someone had the courage to cherish it. A year after the North Star incident, America was much different. Large corporations began to establish independent ethics boards. Universities opened more programs on data fairness and corporate culture. Among them, Light Keepers, a platform founded by Elias Carter, became a bridge between businesses and the community. Thousands of people joined, sharing their stories, the times they dared to stand up, dared to say no to injustice. Somewhere, the light he ignited continues to spread. One spring morning, Elias visited a Light Keepers conference in San Francisco. The conference room was packed, the soft yellow light reflecting off the young faces. When he stepped onto the stage, he was not wearing a fancy suit but a simple white shirt. He looked at the crowd, smiling gently. Exactly a year ago, I was sitting in an airport and was denied boarding despite having a valid ticket. Today, I remember that feeling, not because I was angry, but because it made me understand the true value of justice. No one should be made to feel small in a world built to serve everyone. The hall fell silent, listening. His voice was warm and even, not high-pitched, but carrying weight. Light Keepers is not my organization, but the organization of all those who believe that kindness can change the structure of power. We don't need permission to do the right thing. We just need the courage to start. A round of applause broke out. Elias bowed his head in thanks, his eyes shining with a gleam of faith. After his speech, he left the hall. Tanya Brooks walked over, holding her phone. "Elias, the video of your speech was uploaded online less than an hour ago and has already reached over 1 million views. The comments are all thanks and encouragement." Elias smiled, his voice as light as the wind. "Good, but I just hope that after watching it, someone will choose to treat others better. That's all." Tanya nodded, her eyes filled with pride. Sometimes I think if everyone could keep the fire burning like you, this world would be much warmer." Elias looked into the distance. Every fire needs someone else to keep it burning. I alone am not enough. In the afternoon, Elias visited SkyLink's California branch office. It was now an open space filled with light, greenery, and images of cultural diversity. On the wall was a large mural with the names of those who had contributed to the creation of Light Keepers. He walked slowly, stopping in front of a photo of the boy from Roxbury. Beneath it was the words, "From student to mentor. Keep the light alive." He gently touched the frame, his heart filled with emotion. That boy, now a young engineer, was training a new generation of students. That was what he had always wanted, a stronger, fairer, more humane generation. That evening, Elias sat alone on the hotel balcony overlooking the glittering city. Car lights, house lights, and billboards blended into a sea of light. He closed his eyes and let himself be carried away by the sound of the wind. But deep down, he knew there was something missing. His mother, Linda Carter, was old and frail. He had not been home to see her since the day it all happened. The next day, Elias flew back to his hometown in Virginia. The small house where he grew up still stood modestly on a tree-lined street. Linda was sitting on the porch, knitting a scarf. When she saw him, she smiled gently, her eyes dull but still bright with love. "Son, you're finally home." Elias hugged his mother for a long time. "I'm sorry, Mom. I've been busy for so long." She patted his head, as she had when he was a child. "It's okay, son. I always knew you were busy doing the right thing. But don't forget, people who do the right thing need love, too." The mother and son sat together, the spring breeze blowing gently through the porch. Elias told his mother about the light keepers, about the young people who continued to spread the light of justice. She smiled, her voice slow. "Your father would be proud. He always believed that one person could light up the world if he dared to keep his heart pure." Elias looked out at the distant sky, where white clouds were drifting, his heart filled with boundless gratitude. Late in the afternoon, Elias helped his mother water the garden. The old neighbor walked by and raised his hand in greeting. "Mr. Carter, the whole town is talking about you now. They consider you the pride of the place." Elias smiled kindly. "I only did what anyone can do, sir." The man nodded. "Maybe anyone can, but not everyone dares." That night, Elias sat on the old wooden chair, listening to the chirping of insects. Mrs. Linda was asleep, and he opened his laptop, writing a few lines in his electronic diary. Perhaps change does not start from the system, but from the heart of the people. The system is just a mirror that reflects what we believe. If we keep the light in our hearts, no matter how strong the wind blows, the flame will not be extinguished. He paused and looked up at the starry sky. A sense of peace welled up in him. No more airport dust, no more tension from negotiations, just the sound of the wind and the soft light from the window, a reminder from the past that he was on the right path. The next morning, Elias left home early before his mother woke up. He left a small note on the table, written in familiar handwriting, "I will come back," but this time not to talk, but to listen. "I love you, Mom." On the flight back to Boston, Elias looked out the window. The sun was rising, its light gilding the clouds. He closed his eyes, his father's voice echoing in his mind. "My son, always be the keeper of the flame, but do not be afraid to pass it on." Elias smiled, tears rolling down his face. "I am not afraid, Father, because now I know the light has found its keepers." The Boston morning opened with a thin layer of fog covering the windows. In the top-floor office of SkyLink, Elias Carter sat quietly in front of his monitor, a cold cup of coffee in his hand. A series of reports lay on his desk, but he did not look at any of the numbers. A piece of news had just brought everything to a halt. A group of young Lightkeeper's employees had been hacked after publishing a report exposing corruption in the technology supply chain. Public opinion was in an uproar. The name Lightkeepers was mentioned in newspapers, social media, and international media, and once again, Elias was in the spotlight. Tanya Brooks entered, her voice low and worried. "Elias, I just got word from security. It seems the attack was from an anonymous rival group, but they're blaming us, saying the Lightkeepers invaded our privacy to gather information." Elias didn't answer right away. He looked out the window where the first rays of light were shining. After a moment, he said softly, "We can't let them distort the truth. Call a press conference." Tanya nodded. "I'll prepare. But Elias, you need to rest. You haven't left the office all week?" He smiled slightly. "When darkness falls, the lightkeepers are not allowed to close their eyes." The press conference took place that afternoon, before dozens of cameras and bright lights. Elias took the podium. He was not wearing a suit, just a rolled-up shirt, his gaze direct and calm. "I know there's a lot of speculation," he began, his voice deep and warm. "But Lightkeepers is not a political tool. It's not a weapon. It's a community people who believe that technology can be good. And if I'm attacked for believing that, I'll still be standing here with them." A reporter asked loudly, "Do you think you've gone too far, bringing ethics into the business world?" Elias paused, looking directly at the camera. There's no such thing as going too far when you're just trying to do the right thing. The speech quickly went viral. Millions of shares, thousands of comments. Some called him the voice of conscience of the age. Others said he was naive. But Elias didn't read any of the articles. That night, he just sat by the window, watching the city light up. The light reflected in the glass, thousands of sparkling points, and among them, he saw himself, a small person trying to keep the light from going out in the storm. The next morning, Tanya came in, holding an envelope. "Elias, you should see this." Inside was a handwritten letter from one of the young employees who had been hacked. It was just a few lines. "Thank you for teaching us to be brave. We are not afraid anymore. The light is still here." Elias read it over and over again, his chest tightening. He knew, as tired as he was, he couldn't stop. That afternoon, he went to see Montgomery at the North Star office. The silver-haired man greeted him with a friendly smile. "You have done what I could not do at your age, Elias, but remember, this world needs more than justice. It also needs wisdom." Elias nodded. "I am learning that every day. Sometimes justice is not about talking loudly, but about listening at the right time." Montgomery smiled, putting a hand on his shoulder. "You are different, Carter. Before, you fought with anger. Now you fight with determination. That is maturity." Late that night, Elias returned to his office. On his desk was a draft of his speech for the upcoming Global Technology Forum in Geneva. He reread it, erased a few lines, and then added the final sentence: "We cannot control the darkness that spreads, but we can choose not to turn off the lights." He stared at the words for a long time, feeling warm inside. A week later, he was on his way to Geneva. The city was peaceful, Lake Le Mans reflecting the brilliant sunset. When he stepped up to the podium, the room was silent. "I used to think change came from technology," he began, his voice soft and resonant. "But no. Change comes from people brave enough to ask, 'Is this right?' before they ask, 'Will this work?'" He recounted the journey from North Star Airport to Lightkeepers, the fears, the losses, and the never-failing faith. When he finished, the audience stood up and applauded. After the speech, a young African reporter approached, her eyes shining with admiration. "Mr. Carter, do you think the world can really change?" Elias looked at her, his gaze deep and gentle. "The world is always changing. The question is, for whom does it change if we do nothing? It will change for someone else. But if we choose to take a step forward, even a small step, the light will have another direction to shine." Elias stood on the balcony of his hotel room on his last night in Geneva, looking out into the distance. Below, the city glowed in the darkness. He remembered all the faces: Tanya, Montgomery, His mother, the young people of Roxbury, the Columbia student, the boy who had studied programming, the brave employees who had stood up, all of them, each a sliver of light in a picture he had only lit. He smiled slightly, the night air carrying the scent of continuity. When he returned to his room, he received a message from Tanya Lightkeepers, just reached 1 million members. And we've been invited to partner with the United Nations on the Ethics in AI project. They want you as their chief advisor. Elias read it, sat in silence for a long time. Then he wrote back, "No one can keep the light forever. Tanya. But if we channel it properly, it will never go out." He put down the phone and looked up at the mirror. In the reflection, he saw a man who no longer had the anger of the past, but instead was peaceful and determined. That light was no longer just out there, but in his eyes, and he knew. His journey had come a long way, but the light, which he started with pain, had now become the thing that made others dare to believe, dare to live, dare to stand up. That winter, Boston was colder than usual. The sky was a dull gray, and the wind carried a biting chill. In the quiet room of SkyLink, Elias Carter sat by the window, the white light reflecting off his pensive face. It had been almost 2 years since he had shaken the world with that historic phone call. Everything seemed to have settled down. But something nudged Elias, a feeling that his journey was not yet over. On his desk was a file titled Ethics in AI, United Nations. The project was halfway through its development, and Elias was its lead advisor. Every day he read hundreds of reports, each line posing a question about the future of humanity. Can artificial intelligence understand compassion? Or will it remain a human prerogative in the morning? Tanya Brooks walked in with a hot cup of coffee. "You stayed up all night again." Elias smiled. "I was wondering, if AI learns compassion, will humans still be different from machines?" Tanya put her cup down on the table. "I think differently. What makes humans special is not making mistakes, but being able to regret. And loving." Elias nodded slightly. "You're probably right." "Thanks, Tanya." She smiled softly. "I'm just reminding you that even though you've changed the world, your world still needs a break." That afternoon, Elias left his office and walked along the Charles River. The water was calm, reflecting the cloudy sky. He thought back to the early days being stopped at the airport, making the call that brought down an airline, being seen as an icon. Now, all of that was in the past, like a closed chapter. But what remained was the light of faith, of justice, of humanity. The phone in his pocket vibrated. It was a message from Aisha Coleman, an old friend and activist who had made him think deeply. "Elias, I just attended a conference on data equality in Africa. They showed a video of your speech in Geneva. There were people who had never heard of you, but they cried. You touched their hearts without even meeting them." Elias read, then fell silent. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Not out of pride, but out of emotion. Maybe what he had done was not in vain. That evening, Elias returned to his small apartment. The room was as usual, simple, clean, and cozy. He turned on his computer and wrote the last lines in the diary he had kept throughout his journey. "When I started, I just wanted to be respected as a human being. But then I understood. Justice is not just a personal matter. It is the thread that connects us all. One person stands up. Millions will see. One person is silent. Millions will learn to be silent. The world does not need heroes. The world only needs people who do not give up. He lingered, smiling slightly, the light from the screen reflected on his face. Just warm enough. The next morning, Elias flew to New York to attend the final meeting of the United Nations project. Experts from all over the world were present in the hall. When he entered, the whole audience stood up to greet him. An elderly man, a representative of the United Nations, stepped forward and said, "Mr. Carter, the world owes you a debt of gratitude, but more importantly, the world learned from you that justice is not given. It must be earned with dignity." Elias stood up, his eyes kind and deep. "I don't do anything big," he said. "I just react when I see something wrong. But I believe that if everyone reacts like that, the world will change without shock. We don't need to disrupt. We just need to illuminate." The meeting ended with a long applause. Outside, it had begun to snow. Elias looked up and watched the first snowflakes melt on his shoulders. He suddenly realized that each snowflake was small, but together they could cover the world in white. It was like light. A small ray of light is enough to dispel the darkness if you persevere. Late in the afternoon, he received a call from Tanya. "Elias, I just saw the news. Lightkeepers has just been officially chosen as the global collaboration platform for the Human-Centered Tech program. They want to name the annual award after you." Elias laughed. "If they really want to honor me, they should name the award the Anonymous Light, because justice never belongs to one person. It belongs to everyone." Tanya chuckled into the phone. "I think you're still the same, humble enough to be respected." Elias fell silent, his voice warm and slow. "It's not humility, Tanya. It's just that I haven't forgotten how I was turned away at the airport, just because of the color of my skin. That night, he returned to Boston and sat by the window looking out at the snow-covered city. The street lights reflected off the tiny flakes of snow, creating a shimmering glow. He remembered his father's words. "Don't be afraid to be the only one holding the light. Because if you are strong enough, others will come to your light." He whispered, "Dad, I see it. They're coming." The next morning, Elias visited the Roxbury Center again. The boy, now grown, was teaching programming to the kids. When he saw him, he ran up to hug him. "Uncle Elias, I got a scholarship to MIT." Elias laughed, his eyes shining with pride. "Good job. Son, don't forget to keep your light on." The boy nodded vigorously. "I promise." On the way back, Elias stopped the car on the bridge over the Charles River. The sky was blue. The melting snow reflected the sunlight. He stood there for a long time, breathing deeply, feeling the cold air creep into his chest, but feeling strangely warm inside. He knew he had completed the journey not by winning, but by spreading. When he got home, he opened the old leather notebook and wrote the last line. "The light never dies. It only moves from hand to hand, from heart to heart. And as long as people can look at each other with kindness, the light will remain." Outside, the snow was still falling, but in that small room, the desk lamp was still on, and in that light, there was the shadow of a black man who had been rejected, but chose not to retaliate with hatred, but with the light of kindness. Elias Carter sat still, closed his eyes, listened to the steady beat of his heart. Somewhere, in countless homes, offices, and classrooms, someone was telling his story, not as a legend, but as a reminder justice may be slow, but light is never late. The story of Elias Carter is more than just one black man's journey against discrimination. It is an example of how ordinary people can create extraordinary change, not through anger, but through kindness, perseverance, and wisdom. The biggest lesson is this: justice is not given, it is earned, one small act at a time, one good choice at a time. Elias did not choose revenge when he was wronged. He chose to turn his hurt into the power to fix the system, and that is what made him a symbol, not of power, but of dignity. In life, everyone has been misunderstood and looked down upon, but how we react defines who we are. Sometimes, just standing up for what is right, no matter how small, is enough to brighten up the world around us. Remember, justice begins with ourselves. Compassion is the only light that never goes out, if we know how to keep it in our hearts. Thank you for listening to the story of Elias Carter, a journey of faith, justice, and humanity. If your heart is touched, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to spread humane, profound, and inspiring stories. Because who knows, a small light from you can enlighten someone who is lost.